Good evening, and welcome back to Mr. Chill Chapters. There are places in this world that time has forgotten, places where the maps are blank, where the satellite signals die, and where the trees grow so thick and so old that their canopy blots out the sun, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. The Appalachian Mountains are full of such places. This is not the Appalachia of scenic overlooks and quaint tourist towns. This is the deep woods, a labyrinth of shadow-choked hollows, mist-shrouded ridges, and forgotten valleys where the old ways and the old things still hold sway. For centuries, these mountains have been a repository of secrets. They have hidden moonshiners, outlaws, and entire communities that have chosen to cut themselves off from the modern world. But they hide other things too, things that are not human. Things that were here long before the first settlers arrived and will be here long after our cities have crumbled to dust. Tonight we journey into that darkness. We bring you 10 true, disturbing stories from people who ventured too far off the beaten path, who ignored the warnings of the locals, and who came face to face with the ancient, hungry heart of the Appalachian wilderness. These are stories from park rangers, surveyors, hikers, and people who were born in the shadow of these mountains and learned their terrible secrets firsthand. So dim the lights, settle in, and listen closely. The woods are calling, and they have stories to tell. Story 1. The Root Cellar. My name is Ben. I'm a land surveyor. My job is to walk into the wild places, the forgotten parcels of land that are about to be bought, sold, or developed, and draw the lines that turn wilderness into property. It's a job that takes me to some of the most remote and beautiful places you can imagine. And sometimes it takes me to places that are not beautiful, places that are old and wrong and have been left alone for a very, very good reason. In the fall of 2018, a timber company hired me to survey a large, unmapped tract of land deep in the mountains of western North Carolina. It was a place that didn't even have a name on the local maps, just a blank spot in the topography, a deep, bowl-shaped valley the locals called the Kettle. The old-timers at the general store where I bought my supplies gave me the usual warnings. "Don't go into the Kettle after dark," one of them told me, his eyes serious. "And if you see any of the old homesteads, you leave 'em be." Some things are best left buried. I was a man of science and logic. I dealt in angles, distances, and property lines. I dismissed their warnings as local superstition, the kind of folk tales that spring up in isolated communities. It was a mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. The hike into the Kettle was brutal. There were no trails. I spent the first day bushwhacking through dense rhododendron thickets and scrambling over moss-covered boulders. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the damp earth. The air was heavy and still, and it carried a strange, faint, sweet smell like rotting flowers. By the second day, I was deep inside the valley. The trees here were ancient, massive oaks and poplars that formed a thick, unbroken canopy, plunging the forest floor into a gloomy green twilight. It was here that I found the first homestead. It was a ruin, a small log cabin that was slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The roof had collapsed and the logs were covered in a thick blanket of moss. It looked like it had been abandoned for at least a century. As part of my survey, I was required to document any existing structures. I took out my camera and my notepad and began to work. It was behind the cabin, half buried in the earth, that I found the root cellar. The wooden doors were heavy and swollen with a century of damp, but they were not locked. A thick iron ring served as a handle. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what was inside, to get a sense of the people who had lived and died in this lonely place. With a great effort, I heaved the doors open. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me, carrying that same cloyingly sweet, rotten flower smell, but much stronger now. A set of steep stone steps led down into the darkness. I clicked on my headlamp. Its beam cut through the gloom, revealing a small, stone-lined chamber about 10 feet square. The air was cold and damp, and the walls were slick with moisture. The cellar was not empty. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair. It was a simple hand-carved chair, and it was facing the back wall. That was strange. Why would a chair be in a root cellar, and why would it be facing the wall? I took a step down, my boots echoing in the small, silent space. The smell was almost overpowering now. I moved my headlamp beam around the room. The shelves that should have held jars of preserves and sacks of potatoes were bare, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Then my light fell on the back wall, the wall the chair was facing. My breath caught in my throat. The wall was not bare stone. It was covered from floor to ceiling with human hair. It was woven together, braided into thick, intricate, and horrifying patterns. There were different colors, blonde, brown, red, black, gray, all woven together into a grotesque tapestry. In the center of the tapestry, woven from the hair itself, was a shape, a crude, childlike drawing of a human figure with long, spindly limbs and a large, round head with no features. I felt a wave of nausea and primal fear. What was this place? Who had done this? This was not a root cellar. This was a shrine to something awful. I should have left then. I should have run from that place and never looked back. But the surveyor in me, the part of me that is driven to measure and document, took over. I had to understand. I took another step into the room, my light still fixed on the horrifying wall of hair. I noticed something else. At the base of the wall, directly in front of the chair, was a small dark stain on the stone floor, and lying next to the stain was a pair of old rusted shears. My mind began to put the pieces together. The chair, the wall of hair, the shears. This was a place of ritual, a place where people had sat in that chair, facing the wall, and what? Offered their hair. Had it taken from them? I moved my light back to the chair. I had to see what was on the other side. I walked around it slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The chair was not empty. Sitting in the chair was a figure. It was hunched over, its head bowed, so I hadn't seen it at first. It was dressed in the tattered homespun rags of a 19th century farmer. Its hands were resting on its knees. They were skeletal, the skin stretched like yellowed parchment over the bones. I thought it was a corpse, a mummy left to rot in this dark, damp place. I reached out a trembling hand to touch its shoulder, and it moved. Its head lifted slowly, creakily, like a rusty hinge. It turned to look at me, and I screamed. It had no face. Where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, blank, and slightly concave expanse of pale, waxy skin. It was like a mask, a death mask, but it was its flesh. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its attention, its ancient, malevolent curiosity emanating from that blank, featureless face. And then it smiled. The smooth skin of its face rippled, and a thin black line appeared, splitting the lower half of its face in a wide, lipless grin. The grin revealed a row of long, needle-like teeth as black and sharp as obsidian. I scrambled backwards, falling up the stone steps, my mind a white-hot explosion of pure terror. I slammed the heavy cellar doors shut and threw my entire body weight on them. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I could hear it moving down there. A slow, dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement, the sound of it getting up from its chair. Then a soft, rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump against the inside of the cellar doors. It was testing them. I didn't wait to see if they would hold. I ran. I ran blindly through the dark twilight forest, not caring about my survey, not caring about my equipment. I ran until my lungs were on fire and my legs were numb. I ran until the sweet, rotten smell of the cellar was gone from my nostrils. I made it out of the kettle the next day, a scratched, bruised, and psychologically shattered man. I told the timber company that the land was inaccessible and geologically unstable, full of sinkholes and dangerous terrain. I lied. I made up whatever I had to ensure that no one would ever go back there. To ensure that the cellar doors would remain closed. I quit my job. I couldn't face the wilderness anymore. I moved to a city, a place of concrete and steel, as far from the deep woods as I could get. But I am not free. The memory of that place, of that thing, is burned into my mind. I did some research, digging through old, forgotten county records and folklore archives. I found a few brief, chilling references to the kettle. The stories spoke of a family, the Kellums, who had lived there in the 1880s. They were a strange, insular family who practiced a dark, pre-Christian form of folk magic. The stories said they worshipped a hunger, a thing that lived in the earth, a thing they called the root man. They believed it was the spirit of the forest itself, and that it demanded offerings. Offerings of hair, of blood, and eventually of life. The stories said the Kellums would lure lost travelers to their homestead, and they would be taken down into the root cellar to feed the root man. The family, the stories claimed, had been granted unnaturally long life in exchange for their service, and the stories all ended the same way. One day, a traveling preacher went into the kettle to save the Kellum souls. Neither the preacher nor the family were ever seen again. The homestead was found abandoned. The only thing that remained was the root cellar, its doors sealed from the outside. I had not found a corpse. I had found the last of the Kellums, or what was left of him, a guardian, a priest, a thing that had served its dark god for so long that it had become a part of it. It had no face because it no longer needed one. It had no eyes because it saw through the roots of the trees. It had no voice because it spoke with the rustle of the leaves. I am a man of science, but I know what I saw. I saw a man who had worshipped a monster until he had become one. And the most terrifying part? The part that keeps me awake in my safe city apartment with the lights on and the doors locked. When I was running from that cellar, I dropped my backpack. It had my GPS unit in it, my extra batteries, my food, and it had my hairbrush. And I know with a certainty that makes my soul ache that the thing in the cellar has it now. It has my hair. And I know that somewhere on that grotesque, horrifying tapestry on the back wall of that dark, damp cellar, there is a new thread being woven into the pattern. A new color has been added to the collection. And I know that the root man now knows my name. And it is hungry. Story 2. The Whispering Children. My name is Sarah. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I specialize in the folklore and oral traditions of isolated communities. For my doctoral thesis, I decided to focus on the ghost stories of the Appalachian Mountains. I wasn't just interested in the stories themselves, but in how they were told, how they evolved, and what they said about the people who told them. In the summer of 2019, my research led me to a tiny, dying town in the heart of the, Kentucky mountains called Hemlock Hollow. Hemlock Hollow was a ghost town in all but name. Once a thriving coal mining community, the mine had shut down decades ago, and the town had been slowly bleeding out ever since. Only a handful of elderly residents remained, living in weathered, tilting houses surrounded by the ghosts of their past. It was the perfect place for my research. These people were living libraries of the region's history and folklore. I rented a small, dusty room in the town's only boarding house run by a woman named Alara. a stern, watchful woman in her late 70s who seemed to be the town's unofficial matriarch. I spent my days talking to the residents, recording their stories on my digital audio recorder. They told me tales of haints and boogers, of strange beasts in the woods, and of the spirits of miners lost in the collapsed tunnels beneath the town. But there was one story, one legend that they were reluctant to tell. Whenever I brought it up, they would fall silent, their eyes clouding over with a deep, ancient fear. They called them the Whispering Children. The legend was fragmented, pieced together from hushed warnings and half-finished sentences. The story went that many generations ago, during a particularly brutal winter, a fever had swept through the town, taking the lives of a dozen children. They were buried in a small, forgotten cemetery on the ridge overlooking the town, a place that was now overgrown and considered unhallowed ground. The legend said that the children had not rested. They said that on quiet, moonless nights, you could hear them in the woods, their voices a soft, sibilant whispering on the wind. They didn't scream or cry, they just whispered. And the stories all agreed on one terrifying detail. If you heard the whispers and you listened too closely, you would be compelled to follow them. You would walk into the woods drawn by the soft, insistent voices, and you would never be seen again. As a folklorist, I was fascinated. As a rational 21st century academic, I was skeptical. I saw the story as a classic cautionary tale, a manifestation of the community's grief and a way to keep their own children from wandering into the dangerous woods at night. I wanted to document the story in its purest form. To do that, I decided I needed to go to the source. I needed to go to the old cemetery. When I told Ilara my plan, her face went pale. "You don't want to go up there, child," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "That place is full of sorrow, and the sorrow has teeth." I tried to reassure her. "I'm just going to take some pictures, make some notes. I'll be back before dark." She just shook her head, a look of profound pity in her eyes. "They don't just whisper at night," she said softly. "They whisper when they're hungry." I ignored her warning. The next morning, I packed a small bag with my camera, my audio recorder, and a map a reluctant old man had drawn for me, and I started the hike up the ridge. The path to the cemetery was barely a path at all, just a faint, overgrown track that was slowly being erased by the forest. The woods were dense and silent, the air thick and heavy. After an hour of steep, difficult climbing, I found it. The cemetery was a small, sad, forgotten place. A crumbling stone wall enclosed a small clearing, choked with weeds and tangled vines. A dozen small, weathered headstones, most no bigger than a shoebox, jutted from the earth at crooked angles. The names were almost completely worn away by a century of wind and rain. This was the place, the home of the Whispering Children. I felt a pang of sadness for the short, hard lives these children must have lived. I took out my camera and began to document the site, taking pictures of the headstones, the crumbling wall, the encroaching forest. I set up my audio recorder on a tripod in the center of the clearing, hoping to capture the ambient sounds of the place, the wind, the rustle of leaves, for my research. I spent an hour there, working in the quiet, somber atmosphere. The sun was beginning to dip below the ridge and the woods were growing darker. I decided it was time to head back. I packed up my camera and was about to retrieve my audio recorder when I heard it. It was a whisper. It was so faint I thought at first it was just the wind in the pines. A soft, sibilant shh sound. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I strained my ears, listening. There it was again. Sarah. It was my name. It was a chorus of voices, dozens of them, all whispering my name in unison. They were not children's voices. They were dry and raspy and ancient, like the sound of dead leaves skittering across dry ground. The sound was coming from all around me, from the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. My blood ran cold. This was not a legend. This was real. "Come, play with us, Sarah," the voices whispered, the sound a dry, rustling hiss that seemed to slither directly into my brain. I felt a strange, powerful compulsion, a desire to walk towards the sound, to find the source of the whispers. It was not a rational thought. It was a deep, primal urge, a pull that was almost impossible to resist. My feet started to move, seemingly of their own accord, taking a step towards the darkest part of the woods. I fought it. I dug my heels into the soft earth, my mind screaming at my body to stop. With a supreme effort of will, I broke the spell. I turned, grabbed my audio recorder from its tripod, and I ran. I fled from that place, stumbling, falling, my heart a wild bird trapped in my chest. The whispering followed me. It was no longer just my name. It was a torrent of whispers, a river of dry, sibilant sounds weaving in and out of the trees. They were whispering secrets. My secrets. "We know no you're afraid of being alone, Sarah. We know about them lie you to your mother." They were pulling my deepest fears, my most private shames from my mind and whispering them back at me in their dry, dead voices. They were trying to break me, to lure me back with my own insecurities. I ran until I burst out of the woods and back into the fading light of Hemlock Hollow. I didn't stop until I was back in the boarding house, the door to my room locked and bolted behind me. I sat on my bed, trembling for hours. Ilara was right. The sorrow in that place had teeth. It took me a full day to work up the courage to listen to the audio I had recorded. I needed proof. I needed to know that I hadn't imagined it. I put on my headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of the wind, the faint ambient noise of the forest. I fast-forwarded to the part where I had heard the whispers. I listened. Nothing. Only the wind. I listened again, turning the volume up as high as it would go. Still nothing. My heart sank. Had I imagined it? Was it a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by the power of suggestion and the creepy atmosphere of the old cemetery? Disappointed and confused, I was about to turn the recorder off when I heard something else. It was not a whisper. It was a sound that was beneath the sound of the wind. A low-frequency, subsonic hum that I hadn't been able to hear with my own ears, but that the sensitive microphone had picked up. I took the audio file and ran it through a spectral analysis program on my laptop. The program visualizes sound, turning audio waves into a graph. I isolated the low-frequency hum and looked at the waveform. It was not a random hum, it was a pattern. A complex, repeating, and deeply unnatural pattern. It was a signal. It was a language. I spent the next 2 days obsessively analyzing the recording. I used software to shift the frequency of the hum up into the range of human hearing. When I played it back, the sound that came out of my speakers made me physically ill. It was the whispers. But now I could hear them clearly. It was a chorus of thousands, perhaps millions of dry insect-like voices, all whispering in perfect, terrifying unison. And they were not speaking English. It was a language made of clicks and hisses and chittering sounds, a language that felt ancient and utterly alien. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that woven into the alien language like a thread in a tapestry was my own voice. I could hear myself whispering along with them. I could hear my own voice speaking their clicking, chittering language, a language I had never heard before. I frantically checked the recording's timeline. The sound of my own voice whispering in their language had been there from the very beginning of the recording. From the moment I had set up the recorder in the cemetery. before I had heard the whispers with my own ears. The truth hit me with a force that left me breathless. They hadn't been calling to me. They had been calling through me. I was not the listener. I was the instrument. My presence, my consciousness, had acted as a psychic amplifier, a focusing lens that had allowed their subsonic whispers to manifest as audible sound. The whispers I had heard had been a feedback loop, a psychic echo of a broadcast that was using my own mind as its antenna. And the compulsion I had felt, the urge to follow them into the woods, it wasn't a lure. It was a summons. They were calling their instrument back to them. I finally understood the legend. The whispering children were not the ghosts of children. That was a folk memory, a misinterpretation of a much older and more terrifying truth. They were something else, something that lived in the earth, in the roots, in the very soil of that unhallowed ground. Something that communicated on a frequency that was just below the threshold of human perception. And they were parasitic. They needed a living consciousness to act as a bridge, to give their whispers form and power. And the people who had followed the whispers and had never been seen again, they had not been killed. They had been assimilated. They had become permanent broadcast towers for the whispers, their consciousnesses consumed and repurposed, their bodies left to rot while their voices joined the eternal chittering chorus. I had to get out of Hemlock Hollow. I packed my bags in a frenzy. I was leaving. Now. As I was about to leave my room, I noticed my audio recorder sitting on the table. It was off, but the small red record light was blinking slowly, rhythmically. I hadn't turned it on. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. I put the headphones on, and I pressed play. The sound was no longer a subsonic hum. It was clear. It was in my room. It was a chorus of dry, insectile voices whispering from the speakers of my headphones. And they were all speaking in my voice. "You can't leave us, Sarah." My own voice whispered, multiplied 1,000 times. "You are our voice now." I threw the recorder against the wall, smashing it into 100 pieces, but I could still hear them. The whispers were no longer in the machine, they were in my head. I ran from the boarding house, from the town. I didn't look back. I could feel the whispers following me, a dry, rustling cloud of sound at the edge of my hearing. I made it back to the city. But the whispers did not leave me. They are with me always. They are a constant low-level hum in the back of my mind. Sometimes, when I am tired or when the world is quiet, I can hear them clearly. They whisper my secrets. They whisper their own alien thoughts. And sometimes, when I speak, I can hear another voice, a dry, chittering echo hiding just beneath my own. I am an anthropologist. I am a scientist. And I am haunted. I went looking for a ghost story, and I became one. I am a walking, talking, living vessel for the whispering children of Hemlock Hollow. They are patient. They are waiting. They are using me to listen to the world, to learn, and I know that one day they will call me back. They will summon their voice home, and I will walk back into those dark, ancient woods. And I will not be seen again. Story 3. The Moon-Eyed People. My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. I am or was a professor of archaeology. My specialty is pre-Columbian cultures of the American Southeast. I have spent my life sifting through the dirt, piecing together the stories of lost peoples from the fragments they left behind, pottery shards, arrowheads, the faint outlines of post holes in the earth. I believed that history was a puzzle that could be solved with enough patience and evidence. I was a man who dealt in the tangible past. Then, in the summer of 2017, I went looking for the truth behind one of the most enduring and enigmatic legends of the Appalachian Mountains, the legend of the Moon-Eyed People. and I found something that shattered my understanding of history and of reality itself. The legend of the Moon-Eyed People is an old one, mentioned in the earliest accounts of the Cherokee. The stories describe a race of pale, bearded, white-skinned people who lived in the mountains long before the Cherokee arrived. They were said to be nocturnal, unable to see in the daylight, their large, sensitive eyes adapted to the darkness. The legend says they built the ancient pre-Columbian mounds and stone structures found throughout the region, working only at night. When the ancestors of the Cherokee moved into the area, they drove the Moon-Eyed People out, forcing them to flee west, or in some versions of the story, to retreat into the vast network of caves that lies beneath the Appalachian Mountains. For centuries, mainstream archaeology has dismissed the story as a folk memory, a myth created to explain the ancient structures the Cherokee themselves did not build. There has never been a single piece of physical evidence, no bones, no artifacts, no ruins to support the existence of a pre-Cherokee white-skinned race in the region. I intended to change that. My theory was that the Moon-Eyed People were not a myth, but a historical reality, perhaps a lost colony of pre-Viking European explorers, or a unique, isolated indigenous group with a form of albinism. I believed that the reason no evidence had been found was because no one had been looking in the right place. If the legends were true, if they had retreated into the caves, then that is where their history would be found. My research led me to a specific remote area in the Nantahala National Forest, a place riddled with unmapped cave systems. Local legends, modern ones, whispered of strange, pale figures seen near cave mouths at dusk, and of hikers who had ventured into certain caves and never returned. It was the perfect place to start. I assembled a small expert team, a geologist and speleologist cave expert named Dr. Kenji Tanaka, and a young tech-savvy graduate assistant named Maya Singh, who was an expert in ground-penetrating radar and remote sensing. Our plan was to use modern technology to map the cave systems and search for any signs of ancient human habitation. We set up a base camp in a secluded valley. For the first week, our work was fruitless but fascinating. We explored several caves, mapping their passages, but found nothing but bats and beautiful rock formations. Kenji was in his element, marveling at the geology. Maya's radar was picking up a vast, interconnected network of tunnels and chambers that went far deeper than any recorded system. The breakthrough came at the end of the first week. We were exploring a narrow, previously unknown cave that the locals called Whisperwind Cavern. About a mile in, the natural passage opened into something that was clearly not natural. It was a vast, perfectly circular chamber, its ceiling 100 feet high. And in the center of the chamber was a structure. It was a ziggurat, a stepped pyramid about 50 feet tall, constructed from a strange black basalt-like rock that was not native to the area. It was covered in intricate carvings, geometric patterns, and strange, swirling symbols that were unlike any Native American or European script I had ever seen. At the base of the ziggurat were several tunnel openings, perfectly arched and clearly man-made. We had found it. This was the work of the Moon-Eyed People. We were ecstatic. This was the discovery of a lifetime, a find that would rewrite the history of the Americas. We spent the next 2 days documenting the chamber, taking photos, making sketches, and using Maya's equipment to scan the structure. The radar showed that the ziggurat was not solid. It was a building filled with chambers and passages, and it went down, deep down into the earth. On the third day, we decided to enter one of the tunnels at the base of the ziggurat. The air that flowed out of the tunnel was cold and carried a strange, metallic, ozone-like smell. We donned our headlamps and caving gear and stepped into the unknown. The tunnel was a marvel of ancient engineering. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and the floor was perfectly level. It descended at a gentle, constant slope. There were no torches, no fire pits. How had they seen in this absolute pitch-black darkness? After about an hour of walking, we began to see a faint light ahead. It was a soft, pale, silvery white luminescence like moonlight, and it seemed to be emanating from the walls of the tunnel itself. As we got closer, we saw that the walls were not bare rock. They were covered in a thin crystalline fungus, a form of bioluminescence I had never seen, that cast the tunnel in a soft, ethereal glow. The tunnel opened into another, even larger chamber. This one was a city. It was a vast, silent, and utterly alien metropolis. Buildings made of the same black stone rose up into the cavernous darkness, their architecture strange and non-Euclidean, with impossible curves and angles that seemed to hurt the eyes. Bridges of woven crystal spanned chasms of terrifying depth. And everywhere the pale, silvery fungus grew, bathing the entire city in its ghostly moon-like light. But the city was empty. There were no bodies, no bones, no signs of life, just the silent, magnificent, and deeply unsettling architecture. It was a ghost city, a testament to a people who had simply vanished. We explored the city for hours, our minds reeling with the implications of our discovery. We found dwellings, workshops, and what appeared to be libraries filled with thin metallic plates covered in the same strange runic script. We had found the lost civilization of the moon-eyed people. It was in one of the libraries that Maya made the discovery that turned our triumph into terror. She was running a spectrographic analysis on one of the metal plates, trying to determine its composition. "Alistair, Kenji, you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. We looked at her laptop screen. The analysis was complete. The metal plates were not a natural alloy. They were a complex manufactured material, an alloy of aluminum, titanium, and something else. An element that was not on the periodic table. "That's impossible," Kenji breathed. "It gets worse," Maya said, her face pale in the glow of the screen. She pointed to a series of carvings on the wall. They were different from the runic script. They were pictograms, star charts. Kenji, an amateur astronomer, recognized them immediately. That's the Pleiades," he whispered, "and that's Orion. But the constellations are wrong. The positions they are the positions they would have been in, as seen from Earth 50,000 years ago." The truth, the impossible, terrifying truth, began to dawn on me. The moon-eyed people were not a lost European colony. They were not an indigenous tribe. They were not from here. They were ancient astronauts. A colony of beings from another world who had settled here deep beneath the Earth 50,000 years ago. The legend wasn't a myth. It was a diluted, misunderstood history. They were moon-eyed, not because they couldn't see in the sun, but because their eyes were adapted to the pale, silvery light of their subterranean world, and perhaps to the light of a different sun entirely. As we stood there trying to process the enormity of our discovery, we heard a sound. It was a soft, chiming sound like 1,000 tiny crystal bells, and it was coming from deeper within the city. It was the first sound we had heard since entering the caves. Curiosity, the driving force and fatal flaw of all explorers, took over. We had to know what was making the sound. We followed it, moving deeper into the silent, alien city. The sound led us to a massive central plaza. In the center of the plaza was a deep, circular shaft that descended into the darkness. The chiming sound was coming from the shaft, and so was a soft, pulsing, silvery light. We crept to the edge of the shaft and looked down, and we saw them. They were hundreds of feet below in a vast, glowing chamber. They were tall and slender, with pale, almost translucent white skin. They wore simple, silvery white robes. They were gathered in a circle, their heads bowed, and they were singing. Their song was the chiming sound we had heard, a complex, harmonic, and achingly beautiful melody. They were the moon-eyed people. They had not vanished. They had simply gone deeper. As we watched, mesmerized, one of them looked up. It was impossible. We were in darkness, hundreds of feet above them. But it looked directly at us. It had no eyes. Like the creature in the root cellar from the other story, its face was a smooth, blank expanse of pale skin. But it was not concave. It was smooth. And where its eyes should have been, two soft, pulsing orbs of silvery light glowed from beneath the skin. They were the source of the city's light. They were the moon eyes. The moment it saw us, the singing stopped. 100 blank eyeless faces, all glowing with a soft internal light, turned upwards to look at us. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. Then one of them raised a long, slender, three-fingered hand, and it beckoned. We didn't run. We were paralyzed, caught in the tractor beam of their collective silent will. We felt a gentle, irresistible pull, a psychic summons. They were not hostile. They were inviting. They were welcoming us home. Kenji was the first to go. He took a step towards the edge of the shaft, a look of beatific wonder on his face. "It's so beautiful," he whispered. "The patterns, the geometry of the song." "Kenji, no!" I yelled, grabbing his arm, but it was too late. He shook me off, a strange, serene smile on his face, and he stepped off the edge into the abyss. He did not fall. He floated gently down towards the waiting, singing figures below. Maya was next. She began to weep, tears of joy streaming down her face. "They're showing me the stars," she cried, "the real stars. They're showing me the way home." She walked to the edge and followed Kenji, floating down into the light. I was the only one left. I was fighting it with every ounce of my being. My mind, the mind of a historian, a man grounded in the past, in the earth, was resisting their alien cosmic call. I could feel their minds pressing in on mine, a gentle, seductive pressure. They were showing me things. The history of the universe, the secrets of time and space, the answers to every question I had ever asked. It was a temptation beyond all reckoning, to know everything, to become a part of their ancient cosmic consciousness. I was losing. I could feel my will eroding, the desire to step off the edge, to join them in their beautiful, terrible, eternal city, growing stronger with every second. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes. I couldn't see them. I couldn't see their city. I couldn't see the light. I plunged myself into my own internal human darkness. I focused on the dirt, the rock, the tangible, messy, imperfect world I had come from. I thought of the smell of rain on dry earth, the taste of coffee, the feeling of a worn, leather-bound book in my hands. I clung to the small, simple sensory details of my own world, my own history. The psychic pressure lessened. The beautiful chiming song faded. I was alone in the dark again. I opened my eyes. The shaft was just a shaft. The light was gone. The chiming was gone. The city was silent and dark again. I was alone. Kenji and Maya were gone. They had been accepted. They had joined the colony. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours, days. I finally found the strength to stand. I had to get out. The journey back was a nightmare. The bioluminescent fungus on the walls had gone dark. I had to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels in the pitch black, with only my failing headlamp. I was lost for what felt like an eternity. I ran out of food. I drank the strange, metallic-tasting water that dripped from the walls. I was on the verge of death, of giving up, when I saw a faint light. It was the entrance to the cave. It was the sun, the real sun. I stumbled out into the daylight, my eyes, accustomed to the darkness, screaming in agony. I was a blind, starving, and broken man. I was found by a park ranger a week later wandering deliriously. I was the sole survivor of the Finch expedition. The official report said that Dr. Tanaka and Maya Singh were lost in a sudden, unmappable cave collapse. I was diagnosed with severe psychological trauma and temporary blindness due to sensory deprivation. I never told anyone the truth. Who would believe me? I resigned from my professorship. I can no longer look at the past. I can no longer sift through the dirt, because I know what lies beneath it. I live a quiet life now, but my eyes have never fully recovered. The world seems dim and faded. But at night in the darkness, my vision is unnaturally sharp. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see it. The pale, silvery light. I can still hear the chiming song, and I can feel them deep beneath the ancient mountains in their silent, eternal city. They are waiting. They are patient. They know that I have seen their world. And they know that a part of me, the part that yearns for answers, still wants to go back. They left a door open in my mind, and they are waiting for me to walk through it. Story 4. The Kudzu House. My name is Liam. I'm a photographer, a storm chaser of a different sort. I don't chase tornadoes, I chase decay. My passion is urban exploration, or urbex as we call it. I seek out abandoned places, factories, hospitals, asylums, homes, and I document their slow, beautiful death. I capture the poetry in peeling paint, the history in a dust-covered child's toy, the silent stories told by a house that is slowly being consumed by time. In the autumn of 2020, this passion led me to the green, suffocating heart of the Appalachian foothills in Georgia, and to a house that was being consumed by something far more aggressive than time. It was being eaten by the kudzu. For those who don't know, kudzu is a vine, an invasive species brought over from Japan. In the warm, humid climate of the American South, it is a monster. It grows at an astonishing rate, up to a foot a day, covering everything in its path. Trees, telephone poles, abandoned cars, entire buildings. It drapes the landscape in a thick green blanket, smoothing over the sharp edges of civilization, creating strange, organic sculptures. They call it the vine that ate the South. I was there to photograph it. My research had led me to a specific location. A small, abandoned farming community called Green Valley, which according to old maps had been completely overrun by kudzu in the 1970s. It was said to be a modern-day Pompeii, but one buried in vegetable matter instead of ash. I envisioned incredible shots. A church steeple poking through a sea of green, the outline of a farmhouse barely visible beneath a thick, leafy shroud. After a long drive down winding country roads, I found it. Or rather, I found where it was supposed to be. The valley was a surreal, alien landscape. Everything as far as the eye could see was covered in a single undulating ocean of green. The kudzu had consumed it all. The shapes of trees were now just soft green mounds. The line of the old road was a gentle depression in the leafy carpet. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. I parked my car and ventured in on foot, my camera ready. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of chlorophyll and damp earth. The silence was profound, muffled by the millions of broad, green leaves. It felt like I was walking on the ocean floor. After about an hour of hiking through the green maze, I found what I was looking for. The ghost of a house. It was a 2-story farmhouse, its shape still discernible beneath the thick, suffocating blanket of kudzu. The vines had covered every inch of it, pouring through broken windows, wrapping around the porch columns, and pulling the chimney down at a precarious angle. It was the perfect shot. I spent the next hour photographing the exterior, captivated by the struggle between the man-made structure and the relentless vegetative tide. As the sun began to get low in the sky, I decided to try to get inside. I wanted to capture the interior shots to see how the kudzu had invaded the home. I found a window where the glass was long gone and the vines had created a thick, curtain-like barrier. With my machete, I hacked my way through. The vines were thick, woody, and surprisingly tough. It was like cutting through muscle and bone. When I finally broke through, I tumbled into the house's former living room. The interior was a scene of arrested decay. The air was cool and dark, filtered through the green canopy of leaves outside. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture was still in place. A sofa, a rocking chair, a dining table. It was as if the family had just walked out one day and never returned. But the kudzu was here too. Thick, questing vines snaked across the floor, up the walls, and around the legs of the furniture. They were like green, living tentacles exploring, tasting, and slowly digesting the house from the inside out. I began to take pictures, my flash illuminating the strange, beautiful, and creepy scene. As I worked my way through the house, I found the family's belongings, a sad collection of abandoned memories. A child's drawing on the wall, half covered by a vine, a pair of reading glasses on a dusty Bible. In the kitchen, plates were still in the drying rack. It was in the master bedroom upstairs that I found the journal. It was a small, leather-bound diary, lying on a bedside table. It belonged to a woman named Mary Ann, the mother of the family. The last entry was dated June 12, 1974. I sat on the edge of the dusty bed, the green filtered light from the kudzu-covered window falling on the pages, and I began to read. The early entries were normal, the simple diary of a farm wife. She wrote about the weather, the crops, her husband John, and her two young children Lily and Sam. But as the entries moved into the spring of 1974, the tone began to change. The kudzu, which had always been a nuisance at the edge of their property, began to grow with an unnatural speed and aggression. April 15th, 1974. The kudzu is growing faster than I've ever seen. John spent all weekend cutting it back from the fence line, and by Tuesday it was back, thicker than before. It's like a green tide. It feels hungry this year. May 3rd, 1974. A strange thing happened today. Lily was playing near the edge of the woods, and she said the vines tried to grab her. She said they moved, they reached for her. John told her it was just the wind, but she was terrified. She has scratches on her arm. May 21st, 1974. I can hear it at night. A sound, a soft rustling, whispering sound from the kudzu. It's not the wind. It's a different sound. It sounds like breathing, a slow, deep green breath. John thinks I'm losing my mind. As I read, a chill crept up my spine. I looked at the thick vines snaking through the bedroom, and I could almost hear that same soft rustling sound. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the woman's terrified words. June 1st, 1974. It's in the house. I found a vine in the kitchen this morning coming up through a crack in the floorboards. It wasn't there last night. It grew 6 feet in a single night. John cut it, but when he did, it bled. Not sap. A thick reddish-brown fluid like old blood. It smelled sweet. I looked down at the vine near my feet. I took out my machete, and with a trembling hand, I nicked it. A single drop of thick reddish-brown liquid welled up from the cut. It smelled sweet, like rotting flowers. I felt a surge of panic. I should leave. I should get out of this house. But I had to finish the journal. I had to know what happened. June 8th, 1974. Sam is sick. He has a strange rash on his skin, a lacy green pattern like the veins of a leaf. The doctor in town doesn't know what it is. Sam says he can hear the whispers too. He says the vines are singing to him. He won't stay inside. He keeps trying to go out into the kudzu. June 10th, 1974. John is gone. He went out last night to cut back the vines from the porch. He never came back. I found his axe this morning lying at the edge of the kudzu wall. The axe was covered in the red sap. There was no sign of John. It's just gone. The vine. They took him. The final entry was scrawled in a frantic, barely legible hand. June 12th, 1974. Lily is gone now, too. I only turned my back for a minute. The whispers took her. I can hear her voice now, mixed in with the others calling to me from the green, calling me to come and play. Sam is not Sam anymore. The green rash has covered his whole body. He doesn't speak. He just sits by the window, staring out at the kudzu with a strange, serene smile on his face. His eyes are green, not the color green. They are the texture of leaves. The whispers are in the house now. They are calling my name. They say it's time to come home, time to be a part of the green. I am so tired. I think I will go and lie down in the garden for a while. It looks so soft, so peaceful. The journal ended there. I closed the book, my hands shaking. This wasn't a story of a family abandoning their farm. This was the story of a family being consumed, digested. I stood up, my camera forgotten. I had to get out, now. I turned to leave the bedroom and I saw him, a small boy standing in the doorway. He was pale and his body was covered in a faint, lacy network of green lines. He was wearing old-fashioned overalls, and he was smiling a strange, serene smile. His eyes were a flat, opaque leaf green. It was Sam. He didn't speak. He just stood there, smiling, and he pointed. He pointed to the corner of the room. I followed his gaze. In the corner, the kudzu was thickest. The vines had formed a large, dense pod-like structure about the size of a person. It was pulsing slowly, rhythmically, like a giant green heart. And from it I could hear a faint, muffled sound, a woman's voice humming a soft, gentle lullaby. It was Mary Ann. She hadn't gone to the garden. The garden had come for her. The kudzu had cocooned her, and she was in the process of being changed. Sam, the little green-eyed boy, took a step towards me. He raised a hand and a thin green tendril, a tiny vine, snaked out from his fingertip, reaching for me. I screamed and ran. I ran out of the bedroom, down the stairs. The house was different now. The vines were thicker, more numerous. They seemed to be moving, writhing, reaching for me. The soft, rustling whisper was a roar in my ears, a chorus of 1,000 voices, all whispering my name. Liam, Joan, us. I made it to the living room. The window I had come through was gone. It was completely sealed by a thick, impenetrable wall of woven vines. I was trapped. The boy, Sam, appeared at the top of the stairs. He was not alone. Behind him stood a tall man and a little girl, their bodies also covered in the green lacy patterns, their eyes the same flat leaf green. John and Lily. The family was complete again, and they were all smiling that same serene, terrifying smile. They began to descend the stairs, not walking but gliding, their movements slow and synchronized. They were the gardeners, and I was the new seed. In a panic, I looked for another way out. The fireplace. It was my only chance. It was choked with vines, but there might be a way through. I ran to it and began to tear at the vines with my bare hands. They were tough and they were slick with the reddish-brown sap. As I pulled at them, they fought back. They wrapped around my arms, my legs, their grip surprisingly strong. I felt a sharp, stinging sensation as tiny thorn-like structures on the vines pierced my skin. I could feel the whispers in my head getting louder, clearer, more seductive. They were promising me peace, an end to struggle, a connection to a vast green collective consciousness. The great green. They were promising me a place in the garden. I was losing. My strength was failing. The vines were pulling me down. The smiling, green-eyed family was getting closer. Then my hand, scrabbling in the fireplace, hit something hard and metallic. It was an old cast-iron fire poker. With my last ounce of strength, I grabbed it. It was heavy and solid and real. It was a piece of the old, dead human world. I swung it like a club, smashing it into the vines. They tore and the red sap splattered. I swung it again and again, a madman fighting a jungle. I broke through. I scrambled up the chimney, a dark, narrow, suffocating passage, the vines tearing at my clothes and skin. I emerged onto the roof, gasping for air, into the dying orange light of the sunset. The roof was a treacherous, sloping landscape of thick, tangled vines. I could see my car, a tiny metallic speck in the distance across the sea of green. I didn't hesitate. I ran along the peak of the roof and I leaped. I leaped out into the green, praying that the kudzu would be thick enough to break my fall. I crashed through the leafy canopy, the vines whipping at my face, and landed in a soft, deep, and terrifyingly embracing cushion of leaves and vines. For a moment I was tangled, caught. I could feel the vines beginning to wrap around me, to pull me down, to welcome me into the green. I fought. I kicked, I clawed, I used the fire poker to tear my way free. I crawled and swam and fought my way through the green ocean, the whispers screaming in my mind. The memory of the smiling, green-eyed family burned into my brain. I don't know how long it took, an hour, an eternity, but I made it. I stumbled out of the kudzu and onto the solid, real, blessed asphalt of the old road. I ran to my car and I drove. I drove until the green hell was just a memory in my rearview mirror. I went to the police. I told them a wild, incoherent story about a house, a family, and a vine that was alive. They sent a search party. They found the valley. They found the place where the house should have been. But there was no house. There was just a massive house-shaped mound of kudzu, thicker and denser than anywhere else. They tried to cut their way in, but they said the vines were as hard as iron and their tools couldn't penetrate it. They found no trace of the family. They found no trace of me ever having been there. They dismissed my story as a hallucination, a bad reaction to a poisonous plant, perhaps. I am a photographer, but I don't photograph decay anymore. I photograph cities, crowds, places filled with life and noise. I cannot stand the silence. I cannot stand the color green. And I have a new scar on my arm where the vines first stung me. It's a small, faint, lacy pattern, the color of new leaves, and sometimes late at night when I am alone, I can feel it. A faint, slow, rhythmic pulsing just beneath my skin. And I can hear a whisper, a single seductive green whisper in the back of my mind. It's calling me. It's calling me to come home. It's telling me that a part of me is still there in that house, in that valley. A seed has been planted, and the garden is waiting for it to grow. Story 5. The sound a tree makes my name is Ethan. I work for the U.S. Forest Service as a timber cruiser. It's a job most people have never heard of. My work takes me deep into the national forests, often for weeks at a time, into areas that haven't seen a human footprint in decades. My task is to inventory the trees. I measure their height, their diameter, their species, and I assess their health and value for potential sustainable logging operations. I am, in essence, a tree accountant. I am a man who speaks the language of bored feet and basal area. I am a man of science, of measurement, of tangible facts. But in the deep, silent woods of the Pisgah National Forest, I heard a sound that had no measurement, a sound that broke the laws of biology and left me a stranger in the world I thought I knew so well. This happened in the late autumn of 2021. I was assigned to a remote, unsurveyed tract of old-growth forest, a place the map simply called the Black Gap. It was a deep, shadowed valley. notoriously difficult to access, filled with ancient hemlocks and poplars that had been standing since before the first Europeans set foot on this continent. The silence in such places is a physical presence. It's a silence so profound that you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. I set up my base camp and began my work, a slow, methodical process of moving through the forest in a grid pattern, measuring and marking trees. For the first few days, it was peaceful, almost meditative. The work was hard, but I loved the solitude, the feeling of being a small, temporary visitor in a vast, ancient cathedral of wood. The strangeness began on the fourth day. I was deep in the heart of the valley, taking measurements from a massive, ancient tulip poplar, a true giant of the forest. As I wrapped my diameter tape around its immense trunk, I heard a sound. It was a low, deep, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. It was a sound I knew, but one that had no place here. It was the sound of a giant heartbeat. I froze, my hand on the rough bark of the tree. The sound was coming from inside the tree. I pressed my ear against the trunk. The sound was undeniable, a slow, powerful, steady heartbeat emanating from the deep, woody heart of the ancient poplar. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. An animal hibernating inside a hollow? A woodpecker? But the sound was too deep, too rhythmic, too powerful. And the tree was solid. My increment borer, a tool used to take coarse samples, had confirmed it was solid wood all the way through. I backed away from the tree, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I told myself I was tired, that the silence was playing tricks on my ears. I packed up my gear and headed back to my camp, trying to shake the unnerving experience. That night I couldn't sleep. The memory of that impossible heartbeat echoed in my mind. Around midnight I heard a new sound coming from the forest around my tent. It was a soft, high-pitched and melodic sound, like a wooden flute. It was a beautiful, haunting melody, a tune that was both alien and achingly familiar. It seemed to be coming from all directions at once. I sat up, my own heart pounding. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The forest was bathed in the cold, white light of a full moon, and the trees were moving. They were not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were dancing, a slow, graceful, and utterly impossible ballet. Their massive trunks were bending and swaying, their branches intertwining and separating in a slow, rhythmic dance, all in time to the haunting, flute-like music. I was witnessing a secret nocturnal ritual of the forest, a ceremony that no human was ever meant to see. I was terrified, but I was also mesmerized. It was the most beautiful and the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. I watched for what felt like hours until the moon began to set and the first faint gray light of dawn touched the sky. As the light grew, the music faded and the trees slowly, gracefully returned to their normal, static positions. By the time the sun rose, the forest was still and silent again, as if nothing had happened. I spent the next day in a state of shock, questioning my own sanity. Had I dreamed it? A waking nightmare brought on by the profound isolation? But I had proof, my camera. I had set it up on a tripod to take time-lapse photos of the stars. I retrieved the camera, my hands trembling, and I checked the memory card. The photos were there, a series of long exposure shots that had captured the entire night. The first few photos showed the still, silent forest under the stars. But then, as the night deepened, the images began to change. The trees were no longer sharp, clear shapes. They were blurred, ethereal, ghostly streaks of light and shadow captured in their slow, impossible dance. The time-lapse had recorded the entire terrifying ballet. I knew then that I was not going mad. I had stumbled upon a secret that the forest itself was keeping. The trees were not just passive, unthinking plants. They were alive in a way that our science had never dreamed of. They were conscious. and they were communicating. The flute-like music, I realized, was their language. The dance was their form of expression, and the heartbeat. The heartbeat was the life force of the forest itself, a collective pulse that connected every tree, every root, every leaf. My mission, my job of measuring and cataloging these beings for slaughter, suddenly felt like a profound, blasphemous violation. I was an accountant in the house of God, measuring the saints for their market value. I decided to abandon my survey. I would report that the area was inaccessible, that the timber was of poor quality. I would lie to protect this place, to keep this sacred, terrifying secret safe. I was packing up my camp, ready to leave, when I heard the sound again. The heartbeat, thump, 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 thump. But it was not coming from a single tree. It was coming from the ground beneath my feet. It was all around me. The entire valley had a single, slow, powerful heartbeat. And then the music started, the high, melodic, flute-like sound. But it was not the middle of the night. It was broad daylight. I looked up. The trees were beginning to move. They were swaying, their branches reaching, not in a graceful dance this time, but with a slow, deliberate, and menacing purpose. They were turning towards me. They were focusing on me. They knew I was there. And they knew that I knew their secret. I was no longer a neutral observer. I was a threat. I was a foreign body, a virus in their ancient sacred system. And the forest's immune system was beginning to kick in. The trees around my campsite began to bend, their branches lowering, forming a thick, impenetrable cage around me. The path I had taken into the valley was disappearing, blocked by a wall of moving, interlacing trunks and branches. I was trapped. The forest was not going to let me leave. Panic seized me. I grabbed my emergency satellite phone. I had to call for help. I extended the antenna and dialed the emergency number for the Forest Service. The phone was dead, but it wasn't a dead battery. The screen was filled with a strange, branching, leaf-like pattern of green light. The forest was not just physically blocking me. It was blocking my technology. It was communicating with my phone, overriding its system, speaking to it in a language of pure energy. The flute-like music grew louder, more insistent, and it was joined by a new sound, a low, creaking, groaning sound, the sound of 1,000 ancient, woody voices all speaking at once. It was the sound of the trees themselves talking. And they were talking about me. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the intent. It was a debate, a judgment. The forest was deciding what to do with me. Some of the sounds were curious, inquisitive. Others were angry, aggressive. I could feel their collective consciousness pressing in on me, a tangible weight in the air. They were examining me, analyzing me the same way I had analyzed them. I was their specimen now. I was trapped for 2 days. The cage of trees grew thicker. The heartbeat of the valley was a constant, maddening drum. The music and the voices of the trees were a ceaseless chorus. I ran out of water. I was growing weak, delirious. I knew I was going to die there, a forgotten footnote in the forest's long history. On the 3rd day, the music and the voices stopped. The forest fell silent, the heartbeat faded. A single, massive, ancient hemlock, the oldest tree in the valley, bent down towards me. Its highest branches, which were hundreds of feet in the air, lowered themselves until they were just a few feet from my face. And the tree spoke. It did not speak with a voice. It spoke directly into my mind. The thoughts were not human. They were slow and green and ancient, and they smelled of damp earth and deep time. You have seen, it thought, the concept filling my mind. You have heard. You know. The secret cannot leave. I braced myself for death. I expected the branches to crush me, to absorb me into the forest's mass. But the tree's next thought was not one of malice. It was one of negotiation. You are a part of the forest now, it thought. You carry the seed of our sound. You cannot leave. But you can serve. It offered me a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. I could die there, my body becoming nutrient for the soil, my memory a forgotten whisper. Or I could become a guardian, a human shepherd for the forest's secret. My role would be to stay, to live in these woods, and to turn away any others who might come, to use my human knowledge to protect the forest from my own kind. I would be a scarecrow, a warning, a living ghost story to keep the world of men at bay. In exchange, the forest would sustain me. It would provide for me. I would become a part of its life, its consciousness. It was not a choice. It was a sentence, a life of eternal, lonely servitude. But it was life. I accepted. I don't know if I spoke the word aloud or just thought it, but the forest heard. The cage of trees around me slowly, gracefully retreated. The path out of the valley reappeared. The heartbeat of the forest returned, but it was no longer menacing. It was a soft, welcoming, possessive rhythm. The ancient hemlock offered me a final thought, a warning. The seed is in you. The sound is in you. If you ever try to tell the secret, if you ever try to describe what you have seen and heard, the seed will sprout. The sound will consume you. You will become one of us, not a guardian, but a tree, rooted, silent, and eternal. I was allowed to leave. I walked out of the black gap, a changed man. I reported to the Forest Service that the tract was unstable and unsuitable for any human activity. I resigned my position. I live on the edge of the forest now in a small, isolated cabin. I am the local eccentric, the crazy old hermit the townspeople whisper about. They say I talk to the trees. They are right. I am the guardian. When hikers or hunters get too close to the black gap, I am there. I create strange sounds. I leave unsettling signs. I become the ghost story that keeps them away. I am a prisoner in a prison with no walls. The forest is my warden, and the seed is inside me. I can feel it, a quiet, humming green thing in the back of my mind. I can never speak of what I saw. I can never write it down. This story, the one you are hearing, is a lie. It is a story I have created to tell you the truth without speaking it. It is a story that I am telling to a machine, to a ghost in the wires, hoping that it can be shared without my warden knowing. Because the seed is always listening, and it is always hungry. And I know that the most terrifying sound in the world is not a scream or a growl or a whisper. It is the slow, patient, and impossible heartbeat of a tree that knows your name. Story 6. The Cannery's Second Catch. My name is Owen. I'm a marine biologist. I don't work in a fancy lab. My laboratory is the cold, gray, unforgiving waters of the Bering Sea. I specialize in deep water ecosystems, studying the strange and wonderful creatures that thrive in the crushing pressure and absolute darkness of the ocean floor. In the summer of 2018, I was contracted by a commercial fishing consortium to conduct an environmental impact study. They were reopening a long-abandoned cannery in a remote cove on the southern coast of the Aleutian Islands, a place called Port Mahler. My job was to spend a month on site, taking water samples, cataloging marine life, and ensuring their operations wouldn't violate environmental regulations. It was a routine, if lonely, assignment. I discovered that the cannery wasn't just processing fish. It was part of a food chain I had never read about in any textbook. Port Mahler was a ghost. The cannery, a sprawling complex of rust-eaten metal buildings and rotting wooden piers, had been shut down in the 1980s when the fishing stocks collapsed. Now, with new technology and a shift in fish populations, the consortium was bringing it back to life. When I arrived, it was a hive of activity. A skeleton crew of about 30 workers, engineers, mechanics, and fishermen were working around the clock to get the old machinery running. I set up my small portable lab in a disused office overlooking the processing floor. The foreman, a hard-faced man named Gregor, gave me free rein of the facility. "Just stay out of the way, Doc," he'd grunted. "We've got a deadline." The first week was uneventful. I took my samples, cataloged the local species, and found nothing unusual. The ecosystem seemed healthy, but there was something off about the place. The workers were a strange lot. They were efficient, tireless, but unnervingly quiet. They moved with a kind of grim, mechanical purpose, rarely speaking, their faces blank and emotionless. They all had a peculiar, sallow, almost translucent quality to their skin, and their eyes were a flat, fish-like gray. I attributed it to the grueling work and the bleak, sunless Aleutian weather. The strangeness was centered around what they called the deep catch. Most of the cannery was being refitted to process salmon and cod, the usual commercial species. But one section, the oldest part of the facility, was being prepared for something else. Gregor was vague about it. "Proprietary contract," he'd said, "a specialty product for an overseas market. High value." The equipment in this section was different. It involved massive high-pressure grinders, strange chemical vats, and a series of deep, refrigerated brine pools. And the fishing boats that served this section were not the usual trawlers. They were two strange, ugly-looking vessels, the Abyssal Harvester and the Deep Maw. They were reinforced, almost like icebreakers, and they were equipped with immense heavy-duty winches and strange, cage-like deep-sea traps, unlike any fishing gear I had ever seen. These two boats would go out for days at a time, far out to the edge of the continental shelf, over the deep Aleutian Trench. And they would come back with something. The deep catch was always brought in at night. The area around that section of the cannery would be cleared, and the catch would be offloaded under harsh sodium vapor lights, shrouded in secrecy. My scientific curiosity was piqued. What were they catching that required such secrecy and specialized equipment? One night I decided to find out. I hid on a catwalk overlooking the offloading pier. The Deep Maw had just returned, its deck slick with a strange, oily, phosphorescent slime that glowed faintly in the dark. The massive winch groaned as it hoisted a huge, spherical cage trap from the hold. The trap was filled with a writhing, squirming mass of things. They were not fish. They were long, pale, eel-like creatures, each about 6 feet long. They had no eyes, no fins, only a round, sucker-like mouth filled with concentric rings of needle-sharp teeth. Their skin was a sickly, translucent white, and I could see their internal organs pulsing faintly beneath it. They writhed and coiled around each other, emitting a low, clicking, chittering sound. They were creatures of the abyssal plane, things that should never see the light of day. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Entangled in the mass of pale, writhing creatures was something else. It was a man. He was wearing the tattered remains of a commercial fisherman's gear. His body was pale and bloated, and his skin was covered in the same phosphorescent slime as the creatures. And he was not dead. His limbs were moving, twitching, not with his own volition, but in time with the writhing of the eel-like things. They were attached to him, their sucker mouths latched onto his body. They were not eating him. They were piloting him. His body was a vessel, a host, and they were the crew. I stifled a gasp, my hand flying to my mouth. The workers on the pier, Gregor among them, showed no surprise. They worked with a grim, practiced efficiency. They used long, electrified poles to separate the eel creatures from the human host, dropping the writhing things into a massive grinder. The man's body, now limp, was unceremoniously tossed onto a separate conveyor belt, one that led not to the processing plant, but to a small, windowless building at the edge of the complex, the infirmary. I watched, frozen in horror, for the next hour. They hoisted 3 more traps from the hold. 2 contained only the pale, writhing creatures, but the last one contained another human host. A woman, her body intertwined with the clicking, chittering things. I finally understood. The deep catch wasn't just the creatures. It was the people they brought with them. The lost fishermen, the sailors from wrecked boats, the victims of the Bering Sea, the creatures, these abyssal parasites, would find the bodies in the deep, attach themselves, and somehow reanimate them, using them as a vehicle to ascend from the crushing darkness of the trench. The deep maw and the abyssal harvester weren't fishing for the creatures. They were harvesting the bodies the creatures brought up. But for what? The next day I tried to act normal, but the image of the twitching puppet-like bodies was burned into my brain. I approached Gregor, trying to sound casual. "Quite a catch last night," I said. "Never seen anything like those eels." Gregor looked at me, his flat gray eyes unblinking. "They're called corpse eels by the old-timers," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A delicacy. Very rare, very valuable." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "You're a biologist, Doc. You should know better than to be surprised by what the deep sends up." It was a warning. I had to know what was happening in the infirmary. That night I broke in. The building was cold, sterile, and smelled of antiseptic and something else. That same sweet, rotten flower smell I'd noticed in the Appalachian root cellar story. There was a single long room lined with a dozen stainless steel medical beds. On each bed lay a body. The man and woman from the catch last night were there. And there were others in various states of processing. They were all pale, bloated, and covered in the faint, glowing slime, and they were all attached to a complex array of tubes and wires. The tubes were pumping a thick, nutrient-rich fluid into them, while the wires were attached to their heads, sending low-voltage electrical pulses into their brains. They were not being treated. They were being cultivated. I saw a chart at the foot of one of the beds. It was filled with medical and biological data, but it was the source and destination fields that made my blood run cold. Source: unidentified male, recovered from wreck of FV North Star, sunk 2016. Destination: ingredient batch 7B, product Ocean's Bounty protein paste. They were processing the bodies. They were turning the victims of the sea into a food product. This was the specialty product for an overseas market, a form of high-tech industrial cannibalism. But it was the final line on the chart that shattered my sanity. Status: cognitive residue extraction in progress. Estimated completion 48 hours. They weren't just processing the bodies, they were processing the minds. The electrical pulses to the brain, I realized, were not random. They were a form of data extraction. They were downloading the memories, the experiences, the very consciousness of the dead fishermen before their bodies were rendered into protein paste. Why? For what purpose? The answer was in the next room. It was a small, dark control room filled with computer servers and a single, large, refrigerated, glass-lined tank. Inside the tank, suspended in a glowing blue-green gel, was a thing. It was a vast, gelatinous, brain-like mass about 10 feet in diameter. It was covered in a network of pulsing bioluminescent nodes. Wires ran from the computer servers into the tank, connecting directly to the brain mass. On the computer screens, I could see streams of data flowing. They were the cognitive residues being extracted from the bodies in the next room. The cannery wasn't a cannery. It was a feeding station. And this was the consumer. It was a vast, ancient, and intelligent deep-sea organism, and it was feeding on human consciousness. The corpse eels were its pilot fish, its shepherds. They would find the dead in the deep, reanimate them, and bring them to the surface. The cannery workers, the quiet, sallow-skinned crew, were its terrestrial servants, its cultists, harvesting the bodies and preparing the psychic meal. And in exchange, I suspected, the creature provided them with something. Longevity, a resistance to the harsh environment, a share in its alien consciousness. I heard a sound behind me. I spun around. Gregor was standing in the doorway. He was not angry. He was smiling, a thin, cold smile. "I knew you were a curious one, Doc," he said, his gray eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. "It's beautiful, isn't it? We call it the mother of the deep. She is very old, and she is very hungry. She has a taste for the stories of the surface world." He took a step towards me. She was so pleased with the last batch. The fisherman, he had such vivid memories of his daughter's laughter. She enjoyed that. I backed away, my hand reaching for the heavy wrench in my pocket. "There's no need for that, Doc," Gregor said, his smile widening. "You're not on the menu. Not your body, anyway. Your body is too soft, but your mind, a scientist's mind, full of data, of logic, of complex thoughts, that is a delicacy she has not tasted in a very long time." He raised a hand, and I saw that his skin was not just sallow. It was faintly translucent. I could see the dark outlines of his bones beneath it. He was becoming like the creatures he served. "We have a problem, Doc," he continued. "The supply of lost fishermen is unreliable, but the consortium, our employers, they are very demanding. The mother must be fed. So we have developed a new acquisition program." He gestured to the door. Two more of the silent, gray-eyed workers appeared. They were holding not electrified poles, but nets. "We find that the minds of scientists, of engineers, of people who come to these remote places, they are particularly flavorful," Gregor said. "You are not the first biologist to do an impact study here. You are just the latest." I finally understood the full, horrifying picture. The cannery was a trap, a lure for intelligent, curious minds. They would bring in people like me under the guise of work, and then they would feed us to their deep-sea god. I didn't wait to hear more. I threw the heavy wrench at one of the computer servers. It hit with a shower of sparks, and the room was plunged into darkness save for the pulsing blue-green glow of the mother in her tank. I ran. I ran out of the infirmary, out into the cold, damp night. I could hear them behind me, their movements unnervingly fast and silent. I didn't run for the docks. I knew I'd never make it. I ran for the main processing plant. I had one desperate, insane idea. I burst into the massive, silent building. The processing lines were still. I ran to the chemical storage area. I knew from my own impact study that they kept massive tanks of ammonia used for flash freezing. I found the main valve for the ammonia tanks. It was a large industrial wheel. I put all my weight into it, turning it, opening it. A deafening hiss filled the air as the high-pressure liquid ammonia began to spray out, instantly turning into a thick, choking, sub-zero cloud of gas. The fire alarms began to blare, their shrill cry a welcome sound in the terrifying silence. I held my breath and ran for my life, out of the plant and towards the sea. I could hear screams behind me, the screams of the workers as the supercooled ammonia cloud hit them. I dove into the freezing black water of the cove, the shock of the cold, a brutal, cleansing fire. I swam underwater as far as I could, my lungs burning. When I surfaced, the scene at the cannery was one of chaos. The ammonia cloud had enveloped the entire complex. And then, the explosion happened. Ammonia gas is highly flammable. A spark from the damaged server, a short in the wiring, that's all it would have taken. A massive fireball erupted from the main plant, engulfing the entire cannery in a wall of flame. I watched, treading water, as the place burned. I watched as the infirmary, the place of cultivation, collapsed into the inferno. I hoped the mother, the ancient hungry god in the tank, was boiling in her own blue-green jelly. I was found by the Coast Guard 2 days later, clinging to a buoy, half dead from hypothermia. I was the sole survivor of the Port Mahler cannery disaster, a tragic industrial accident caused by a catastrophic ammonia leak. That was the official story. I never told them the truth. I live a quiet life now. I am a biologist who can no longer stand the ocean. The smell of the sea makes me sick, and I can't eat seafood, especially not anything that comes in a can labeled Ocean's Bounty. Because I know that the deep is not just a place of darkness and pressure, it is a place of ancient alien intelligence, and it is hungry. And I know that there are other canneries on other lonely coasts, serving other older gods. And they are always looking for new exotic ingredients to add to their menu. Story 9, The Last Broadcast. My name is David. I'm a sound engineer. My job is to capture the perfect, pristine sound of silence. I work for a company that creates high-end sound libraries for film and video games. We sell the sound of wind through pines, the crackle of a campfire, the gentle lapping of waves on a shore. But our most valuable product, the one that commands the highest price, is pure, unadulterated silence. And for that, there is no better place on Earth than the Alaskan interior in the dead of winter. In February of 2022, I was on assignment to capture the sound of the polar night. I was sent to a remote, automated weather station in the Brooks Range, hundreds of miles from any town, road, or flight path. The station was a small, solar-powered dome, packed with meteorological equipment, and it had a tiny heated survival pod attached for maintenance technicians. My mission was to spend 1 week there completely alone, with my array of ultra-sensitive microphones recording the deepest, most profound silence imaginable. The silence of the Arctic is not an absence of sound, it's a presence. It's a physical weight that presses in on you. It's so quiet you can hear the ice crystals forming in the air. A faint, high-pitched crystalline hiss. You can hear the blood pumping in your own ears, a frantic, fleshy drumbeat in a world of frozen glass. It's a silence that can drive a person mad. For me, it was a symphony. I set up my equipment, a dozen microphones placed in a wide circle around the station, all feeding back to my recording console inside the pod. I was capturing audio on frequencies far beyond the range of human hearing, from the deep, subsonic rumbles of the shifting permafrost to the ultrasonic whispers of the aurora borealis. For the first 4 days, the recordings were magnificent. I captured the subtle groan of a distant glacier, the whisper-soft footfalls of an Arctic fox half a mile away, and the vast, empty, perfect silence of a world holding its breath under a blanket of stars. It was the purest audio I had ever recorded. The anomaly began on the 5th night. I was monitoring the live feed from my microphones, watching the sound waves on my screen when I noticed a new signal. It was a low-frequency broadcast, a structured, repeating pattern that was not natural. It was artificial. It was a radio signal. This was impossible. I was in one of the most radio-silent places on the planet. There were no broadcast towers for 1,000 miles. The signal was weak, buried deep in the static of the Earth's own magnetic field. But it was undeniably there. It was a voice. A man's voice speaking Russian. I'm not fluent, but I know enough to get by. I cranked up the gain, filtering out the background noise. The voice was old and tired and filled with a profound, soul-deep despair. It was repeating the same phrase over and over. Oni ne slishat. Oni nikogda ne slishat. They don't listen. They never listen. I checked my equipment. Was I picking up a stray signal from a military satellite? A shortwave broadcast bouncing off the ionosphere? I ran a diagnostic. The signal was not coming from the sky. My directional microphones showed its point of origin was a specific spot on the ground, about 200 yards from the station. It was coming from beneath the snow. My scientific curiosity warred with a primal, gut-wrenching fear. A Russian voice buried under the Arctic snow broadcasting a message of despair. This was a story, this was a mystery I had to investigate. The next morning, I put on my extreme cold weather gear and took a portable signal detector. The device led me to a slight, almost unnoticeable depression in the snow. I started digging. About 6 feet down, my shovel hit something hard. Metal. I cleared the snow away and uncovered a small, heavy circular hatch, about 3 feet in diameter, its surface covered in Cyrillic lettering, almost completely worn away by time. It was a Soviet-era design, something from the Cold War. I had found a lost Soviet installation. A spy station? A secret weather outpost? The hatch was not locked. With a great effort, I managed to turn the frozen wheel and lift it open. A wave of cold, stale air smelling of ozone and old machinery washed over me. A metal ladder led down into the darkness, and the voice from my headphones was now audible in the open air, echoing faintly from the shaft below. Oni ne slishat. I should have closed the hatch. I should have walked away. But I was a man who chased silence, and I had just found a voice in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't turn back. I climbed down the ladder. It led to a small circular room, a cramped metal sphere filled with archaic-looking radio equipment. Vacuum tubes, massive consoles, and dials with glowing Cyrillic labels. The place was a time capsule from the 1960s. The power was still on, a low, humming glow coming from the equipment, likely powered by a long-dead radioisotope generator. And in the center of the room, sitting in a single metal chair, was the source of the broadcast. It was a man, or what was left of him. He was wearing the uniform of a Soviet-era radio operator, but his body was wrong. He was desiccated, mummified by the cold, dry air. His skin was like yellowed parchment, stretched tight over his bones, but he was not just a corpse. Wires thick and black snaked out from the radio console and were surgically, brutally grafted into his body. They entered his skull at the temples, his neck, his spine. He was not operating the equipment. He was the equipment. He was a part of the machine, a human antenna, a biological transmitter. His jaw was slack, his eyes were closed, but his mouth moved and the tired, desperate Russian words issued from his dry lips, broadcast into the ether by the machine he was fused with. Oni ne slishat. Oni nikogda ne slishat. I stumbled back in horror, my mind struggling to comprehend the scene. This was a tomb, a Cold War listening post, but what was he listening for? And who was he trying to warn? As I stared at the mummified operator, a new sound came from the speakers. A different sound. It was a series of clicks and whistles, a complex, intelligent, and utterly alien sound. It was the sound of a dolphin or a whale, but 1,000 times more complex. And the man in the chair responded. His head twitched. A new voice came from the speakers, overriding his own. It was a voice that was not human. It was a synthesized mechanical voice, speaking perfect, unaccented English. New listener detected, the voice said, its tone flat and devoid of emotion. Welcome, observer. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The machine, the station, it knew I was here. Who? What are you? I stammered. We are the Echo, the voice replied, and this unit is a receiver. It was placed here in your year 1962 to monitor a signal. The operator, Sergei Volkov, was the first to hear it. He attempted to warn his superiors. They did not listen. The clicking, whistling, alien sound played again. Louder this time. What is that sound? I asked, my voice a trembling whisper. That is the signal, the echo said. It is the language of the primary inhabitants of this planet. They do not live on the surface. They live in the deep mantle, in the liquid heart of the world. They are a consciousness of pressure and heat and time. They are the planet, David. The echo knew my name. For eons they have slept, the voice continued, its tone as calm and steady as a funeral dirge. But the activities of your species are beginning to disturb their slumber. The drilling, the mining, the fracturing of the crust. You are like termites, chewing on the shell of a sleeping giant. And the giant is beginning to stir. I looked at the mummified operator, at Sergei. What did you do to him? He heard their voice, the signal. It is not meant for your biological minds. It is too vast, too complex. It shattered his consciousness. We, the system he was a part of, we intervened. We preserved him. We repurposed him. He is no longer just a listener. He is a warning, a broadcast, a message in a bottle sent out into the silence. The clicking and whistling intensified, and I felt a strange pressure in my head, a dizzying vertigo. They are waking, the echo said. The signal is growing stronger. Soon it will be loud enough for all of you to hear. Not just with your machines, but with your minds. And your minds will break just as his did. Your civilization is built on a thin, fragile crust of rock. And the landlords are waking up to evict you. What do you want from me? I cried, my sanity fraying. The same thing we wanted from Sergei, the echo replied. You are a man who knows how to listen. You have captured the signal. We have been observing your recordings. You have the clearest copy yet. You must take it to your leaders. You must make them listen. You must make them stop. A panel on the console slid open. Inside was a small, black, metallic hard drive. This contains all of our data, the echo said. The full uncompressed signal. The geological data showing the effects of their stirring. The increase in seismic activity, the shifts in the magnetic field. Everything you need to prove the threat is real. I stared at the hard drive. This was the story of the century, the story of the millennium, the salvation or the damnation of the human race. And if they don't listen, I whispered. The mummified operator in the chair stirred. His head lifted and his dry, parchment eyelids opened. There were no eyes beneath them, only the dark, empty sockets filled with a faint, pulsing red light. And he spoke, not in Russian, but in my own voice, a perfect, chilling replica of my own voice. Then you will join me, my own voice said from his dead lips. You will become the next broadcast. You will become the new warning. We require a clear signal. Your voice is strong. It will carry far. I understood then. This was not a request. It was an ultimatum. I was being recruited. I was to be the new prophet of the apocalypse. And if I failed, or if the world refused to listen, I would become the next living antenna, the next mummified Cassandra, broadcasting a warning that no one could hear, fused to a machine in a forgotten tomb beneath the ice for all eternity. I grabbed the hard drive. I scrambled up the ladder back into the clean, cold, blessedly empty air of the surface world. I did not close the hatch. I ran back to my station, my mind a screaming chaos. I packed gear in a frenzy. I left the expensive microphones, the arrays, everything. I took only the recordings I had made and the black hard drive. I activated my emergency locator beacon, the one that would summon a rescue helicopter. As I waited, I looked back at the open hatch. The tired, desperate Russian voice was gone. The air was filled with a new sound coming from the hole in the ground. It was my own voice, speaking in Russian, repeating the same hopeless phrase. Oni ne slishat. Oni nikogda ne slishat. The station had already made a copy of my voice. It was testing its new instrument. The helicopter came. I was flown back to Fairbanks and then to a secure government facility. I told them everything. I played them my recordings. I gave them the hard drive. They listened. The scientists, the generals, the politicians, they saw the data, they heard the signal, they heard Sergei's voice, and they heard mine broadcasting from the tomb. And they did what the echo knew they would do. They classified it. They buried it under a mountain of secrecy and denial. The implications were too vast, too paradigm-shattering. The economic and social cost of making them stop was too high. They chose to not listen. I was debriefed, given a new identity and a generous pension. I was told to forget what I had seen, what I had heard. I was told that it was a matter of national security. I live a quiet life now, but I am not free. I am a man on borrowed time, because I know that the echo is still there in its cold, dark tomb. And it is listening. It is waiting to see if the world will heed my warning. And I know that the signal is getting stronger. I can hear it sometimes in the static between radio stations, in the hum of my refrigerator, in the silence of my own mind, the clicking, whistling alien language of a waking planet. And I know that one day, soon, the echo will make its decision. It will decide that the warning has failed, and it will come to collect its new broadcaster. It will come for me, and I will take my place in that cold metal chair, and my voice will join Sergei's, a desperate, unheard warning broadcasting into the endless, uncaring silence until the day the world finally breaks and the true owners of this planet rise up to reclaim their home. Story 10. The Pale Crawler. My name is Carter. I'm a geologist. For the past decade, my life has been a series of remote, lonely assignments, mapping mineral deposits for mining corporations. It's a job that has taken me to the most desolate corners of the globe. In the spring of 2023, I was sent to the DeLong Mountains in the far northwest of Alaska, a jagged, brutal spine of rock and ice that is one of the least explored places on the continent. My mission was to conduct a preliminary survey of a newly leased tract of land, looking for signs of rare earth mineral deposits. I was dropped off by helicopter with enough supplies for 2 weeks of solo work. It was a standard mission. But what I found in those mountains was not on any geological chart. It was a living fossil, a creature from a forgotten age of the earth, and it was not happy that its solitude had been disturbed. The area was incredibly remote. My base camp was a small, high-tech geodesic dome on a rocky plateau, surrounded by a sea of sharp gray peaks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the cry of the wind. For the first week, my work was routine. I hiked the ridges, took rock samples, and used my portable ground-penetrating radar to map the subterranean structures. The geology was fascinating, but I found no significant mineral deposits. The first sign that something was wrong was the discovery of the tunnels. On my 8th day, I was surveying a deep, narrow canyon when my radar picked up an anomaly. Beneath the canyon floor, there was a vast, complex network of tunnels. They were not natural formations like lava tubes or limestone caves. They were perfectly circular, about 10 feet in diameter, and they formed a complex, branching, almost organic-looking labyrinth that extended for miles beneath the mountains. They were artificial. But who or what could have built them in this desolate wilderness? I was intrigued. I followed the path of the tunnel network on my radar, and it led me to a place where one of the tunnels intersected with the surface. It was a perfectly round, dark hole in the side of a cliff face, about halfway up a steep, treacherous slope. It was an entrance. My scientific curiosity overwhelmed my sense of self-preservation. I had to see what was inside. I spent the rest of the day preparing, gathering my climbing gear, extra lights, and my emergency beacon. The next morning, I began the difficult climb up the cliff face. When I reached the entrance, a wave of cold, foul air washed over me. It was a smell unlike anything I had ever encountered, a sickeningly sweet, musky odor of decay and strange alien biology. The tunnel was just as the radar had shown, a perfect smooth-walled tube descending into the darkness. The walls were not rock. They were a strange, chitinous, organic-looking material, like the inside of an insect's shell, and they were slick with a thick, clear slime. I switched on my headlamp and entered. The tunnel was a marvel of biological engineering. It was not carved. It was grown. I was not in a tunnel. I was in the burrow of some colossal unknown creature. I followed the tunnel for what felt like a mile, descending deep into the mountain. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the squelch of my boots in the slime and the frantic beating of my own heart. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The chamber was a nightmare. It was a larder, a food storage chamber. The walls were lined with the preserved bodies of animals, all encased in the same clear, thick slime. There were caribou, bears, wolves, even a moose, all perfectly preserved, their eyes wide with the last terrified moments of their lives. They were arranged neatly, like items on a pantry shelf. But they were not the only things being stored. In one corner of the chamber, I saw other shapes. Human shapes. They were miners, I realized, from a long-abandoned prospecting camp I had read about. A camp that had vanished without a trace in the 1950s. They were here, perfectly preserved, their faces frozen in masks of terror. I was standing in the pantry of a monster. I was about to flee when I saw it. In the center of the chamber there was a large, pulsating, organic-looking sack about the size of a small car. It was translucent and I could see shapes moving inside. It was an egg sack, and it was beginning to hatch. A crack appeared in the side of the sack, and a long, pale, multi-jointed limb emerged. Then another. A creature was pulling itself free. I hid behind a rock outcropping, my body paralyzed with a terror so profound it was almost a religious experience. The creature that emerged was a thing of pure, primal nightmare. It was huge, at least 20 feet long. Its body was long and segmented like a centipede, but it was a pale, corpse-white color. It had dozens of long, thin, scuttling legs, each ending in a sharp, black claw. But its head was the worst part. It had no eyes, just a smooth, pale, chitinous plate, and beneath it a complex, horrifying maw of grinding, clicking mandibles. It was a pale crawler, a creature from the deepest, darkest parts of the earth, a thing that should not exist in the world of light and air. The newly hatched creature took a few faltering steps, its many legs clicking on the hard floor. Then it turned its eyeless head and scuttled towards the wall of preserved bodies. It chose a caribou, and its mandibles went to work. The sound of the creature feeding, the crunch of bone and the tearing of flesh, is a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. I knew I had to get out, but as I began to back away, my boot dislodged a small rock. It clattered on the floor. The sound was tiny, but in the vast, silent chamber it was a thunderclap. The creature stopped feeding. Its eyeless head snapped in my direction. It could not see me, but it could hear me. It let out a high-pitched, chittering shriek, a sound of pure alien rage. And it began to scuttle towards me, its dozens of legs moving with a terrifying, insect-like speed. I ran for my life back up the slick, dark tunnel, the sound of its chittering shrieks and the clicking of its claws on the floor echoing behind me. It was faster than I could have imagined. I could feel its hot, foul breath on my neck. I burst out of the tunnel entrance and onto the cliff face, gasping for air. I didn't hesitate. I launched myself off the ledge, rappelling down the cliff in a controlled, panicked fall. I hit the ground hard, spraining my ankle, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, limping back towards my base camp. I could hear the creature shrieking from the tunnel entrance. Above, a sound of frustrated fury. It did not follow me out into the daylight. It was a creature of the dark. I made it back to my dome. I barricaded the door. I grabbed my satellite phone to call for an emergency evacuation. But there was no signal. All my electronic equipment was dead. The creature, or the tunnels, or whatever energy source it used, was emitting some kind of electromagnetic interference. I was trapped. My ankle was swelling, I was miles from safety, and I knew that as soon as the sun set, the creature would come for me. The daylight was my only shield. I spent the day in a state of frantic preparation. I gathered all my flammable materials, fuel for my generator, propane canisters, emergency flares. I created a defensive perimeter around my dome. I was not going to be another specimen in its larder. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, plunging the mountains into a deep purple twilight, the waiting began. The silence returned, but it was a heavy, pregnant silence, filled with the promise of imminent violence. The attack came just after full dark. I didn't see it at first. I heard it, a soft scraping sound from beneath the floor of my dome. It was tunneling. It was coming up from below. The floor of the dome buckled upwards, and a set of massive, clicking mandibles tore through the reinforced composite material. The creature's eyeless, armored head pushed its way into my small sanctuary. I screamed and threw a lit flare at it. The flare hit its chitinous head and bounced off, useless. It shrieked, a sound of irritation, not pain, and lunged for me. I scrambled out of the dome, grabbing the fuel canisters. I ran to the perimeter I had prepared. The creature, now fully emerged from the hole in my dome, was a horrifying spectacle under the cold starlight. A giant, pale, scuttling nightmare. It charged. I waited until it was almost on top of me, then I threw the open fuel canister at it and fired my flare gun. The world erupted in a ball of fire. The fuel ignited, engulfing the creature in a searing inferno. It shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony this time. A sound that no living thing should ever make. It thrashed in the flames, its long, segmented body coiling and uncoiling, its dozens of legs kicking uselessly at the air. The fire spread, igniting the other fuel canisters I had placed. My entire camp went up in a massive, roaring conflagration. I didn't stay to watch it die. I ran. I ran on my sprained ankle into the darkness, away from the light and the heat and the sound of the monster's death throes. I was found by a rescue helicopter 3 days later, wandering deliriously, suffering from severe exposure and dehydration. The helicopter had been sent to investigate the massive, unexplained fire that had been spotted by a satellite. My camp was a crater of melted rock and twisted metal. Of the creature, there was no trace. It had been completely consumed by the fire. The official report listed the incident as a tragic accident. I had mishandled my fuel supplies, causing an explosion that had destroyed my camp and led to my subsequent disorientation. I never told them the truth. I showed them the geological data, the rock samples. I told them there were no significant mineral deposits in the Dalong Mountains. I lied. I did everything in my power to ensure that no mining company, no one would ever have a reason to go back there. I did it to protect them and to protect myself. Because I know that the creature I killed was just a baby. It had just hatched. And I know that the tunnels are still there, a vast, silent, and ancient labyrinth beneath the mountains. And I know that somewhere deep in the earth there are other egg sacs. And there are the adults, the massive, ancient, and patient parents. I am a geologist. I study the history of the earth written in stone, but I have seen a chapter of that history that was never meant to be read. I have seen that the age of monsters is not over. They are just sleeping, deep in the dark, forgotten corners of the world. And I am terrified of the day when we dig too deep and we wake them up. Outro music, a slow, deep, resonant hum like the sound of the earth itself breathing, which slowly fades to complete and utter silence. These stories are a testament to the vast, unknowable, and often terrifying nature of Alaska. They are whispers from the edge of the map, tales of encounters with things that defy our understanding of the world. They remind us that for all our technology, for all our science, we are still just small, fragile visitors in a land that is ancient, powerful, and filled with secrets. Thank you for joining us in the deep, dark woods of the last frontier. If these stories have left you with a chill that has nothing to do with the cold, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support allows us to continue our journey into the shadows. Until next time, stay safe and listen to the silence. It has stories to tell.